Welcome to the final session of the 2020 FH Global Summit. It's been a pleasure to be with all of you over the last 9 months from around the globe as we delve deep into solutions to improve the treatment of those with inherited forms of cardiovascular disease. It's been a brave new world, and we are so thankful that so many have joined us. Over 1,300 people participated in the summit this year. We've had hundreds of questions. It's been a truly global reach of the summit, allowing this virtual platform has allowed people from all over the world and from all areas of the spectrum of FH in the ecosystem to participate. It's been our most diverse set of speakers and topics, and we have had reach even beyond the summit through things like YouTube videos, which have been watched over 1,400 times. So we're extremely excited that you're here and that you've joined us this year. I'm Josh Knowles, the Chief Research Advisor of the FH Foundation and Assistant Professor of Medicine at Stanford. I'm co-chairing the summit along with Dan Rader. It's been a pleasure to do that this year, the FH Foundation's Vice Chair and Chief Scientific Advisor. He's the Seymour Gray Professor of Molecular Medicine and Chair of Genetics at the Perelman School of Medicine at UPenn. Please use the chat feature on the bottom of the screen to introduce yourself. I see that many people are doing that already. We love to see that. We love to get to know you. It is important to remember to change your settings to panelists and attendees if you would like everyone to see your comments. We will, as usual, take questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we will try to use our online platform to answer as many questions as we can today in real time. And today's session is being recorded, and as the other sessions will be available following the summit. As usual, we'd like to thank our 2020 FH Global Summit sponsors for their generous support. And I really want to take a moment to acknowledge our partners, including Amgen, Novartis, Regeneron, Amaryl, Verve Therapeutics, Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals, Canica Medical Products, Silence Therapeutics, and Bio. We would especially like to thank Esperion for being our foundation level partner. This series would not be possible without their generous support. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Eric Sijbrands, who's been a steadfast friend and colleague of the FH Foundation for many years. He's attended essentially every summit and has been a real advocate nationally and internationally for the FH Foundation. He's a professor of vascular medicine at Erasmus MC in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. He's been investigating cardiovascular genetics for 25 years and has had a focus on FH. And especially defining that patients with identical mutations can have different prognoses. He's really worked hard to improve the assessment of risk in FH patients through imaging studies. So Eric, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knowles, dear Josh, for this kind introduction. I would like to first put on my slides. There they are. Can you see them?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. These are my potential conflicts of interest. Before I want to start the lecture, I would like to tell you something about the view on the FH Foundation from outside the US, a more worldwide idea about the impact the FH Foundation had so far. And I'm particularly impressed by the increase of the worldwide awareness of FH ever since the FHF came around. And I was amazed that quickly all kinds of research projects started. I think that the advocacy is unparalleled. It's amazing support for all researchers and all physicians working in FH worldwide. And no need to add that FH education profits a lot from all the meetings organized by FHF. And I think that a highlight for us was that the ICD-10 codes came along, and that really eased the way to talk about FH worldwide and with all stakeholders. And then, of course, the global call to action on familial hypercholesterolemia. I think that that's a great success, and actually automatically followed all these activities. And then, of course, we have this global summit, to which I'm always looking very much forward. And we were planning it with this very good, I would say, this very good team of coaches to set up a summit like this. And then this particle came along, and we had to change all the plans. And we decided to change the summit in 8 online sessions. And here are the speakers, and I will go through all the presentations, of course, give them not enough time to tell all the highlights of each session, unfortunately, but just to give you the highlights and perhaps you remember more than I can produce right now, but to make these sessions live a bit longer in your heads. And then, of course, thank you for this great attendance of these lectures. And there's also something odd going on in this program, because it's a tiny bit, it's strange that 2 Dutchmen are present, are the presenters of the last 2 sessions. But probably that's due to the fact that Americans always want to know how the Dutch did it and how the Dutch are doing it right now. Unfortunately, I cannot go into that today. I've not enough time for that. In the future, I will do that. Session 1 was a very, very special session. Rob Hagley received the Pioneer Award from the foundation. And here he is at work together with his dog. But he is also someone, he didn't only take his dog to work, but he is one of the first who really started to use genetics in his clinical practice. And not only for science, he did terrific science, but also for clinical use. And therefore, I agree, the word pioneer is really the right word and the right award for Robert. If you logged in a tiny bit too late, you might have thought that you ended up in an art class. But then this slide appeared, and it's not a Pollock, but this is a DNA microchip of which Rob made a very arty picture. And then he continued with real genetics, and he discussed these topics, how we look at FH in the past, how we're looking at it right now, and from a classical Mendelian disorder to a more complex polygenic disorder. And he didn't tell us that actually he contributed both to both ways of looking at FH a lot with his own research. And here you have an example of that. If you collect hypercholesteremic patients and you test their genes, then approximately half of them have major monogenic disorder. And a lot of other loci are involved as well, underscoring that it's really a complex disorder already at the cholesterol level. And of course, if you continue, if you go on, if you look at the atherosclerotic, with classical, am I still online? I see all kinds of things
Yes,
happening.
you went off just for a second, but you're back on.
Okay, and are my slides still visible?
We don't see your slides right this second.
Okay, I will do it again. Okay.
That's better.
Sorry for that, technical problem. If you go to a more extreme classical phenotype and you do the same testing, then the monogenic major allele problem makes out over 90% of the person. So it's also a way of looking at your population. And my slides are not moving right now. Is there a technical problem? No. So to conclude, the talk of Robert was showing us that FH genetics is complex, that molecular diagnosis assist in our clinical diagnosis, and we can target treatment more optimal, and we can use it in prevention strategies, and especially we use it in the Netherlands for cascade screening. And Rob emphasized that it's the LDL cholesterol level we need to treat, and we do not need to treat the mutation status per se. So it's the phenotype we treat and not the genotype. Session 2 was about actually inclusion. And we haven't been particularly well in that respect. And Latrice showed us that actually all our knowledge about the mutations, about the disease, probably comes from the Caucasian patients. And there is something, I didn't realize that before, but of course, if you do perform a cascade screening, then you, per definition, select on the more frequent disorders. So you select on the more frequent presence of a specific mutation. Per definition, you select the large families in your population. And you, with that method, you deselect people that just arrived. So the new Dutch are represented in our FH panel. Although we didn't perform a real cascade screening, we actually used all kinds of different ways to screen the patients. I would call it always, I would prefer the name pragmatic screening. So we started only to perform cascade screening when a real big family came around. But still, it's selected towards a specific phenotype. And Latrice said that actually, and we didn't think of it at that time when we started off and started to do our research, we should have, in the design of our screening method and our research, we should have planned to be more inclusive. That was not a topic at that time. Actually, we were happy that we were able to perform the molecular genetics at these times. And then Zahid showed us that the patients with a diagnosis from European ancestry were overrepresented also in the Cascade FH program. So that's probably also reflecting the way we worldwide worked through large pedigrees in the first place. So we collected the most present mutations in the largest families first. Then the third session was about the behavioral economics and how these can influence our attempts to prevent cardiovascular disease. And I love this slide. Kevin showed us this slide, and it teaches me a lot about English. Things I would love to see, but then actually in the end, if you look at the first letters of each sentence, this means I would love to means must. And to a Dutchman, this sounds completely different. I think if I read would love to see, it's not necessary to do it. He likes it, but he doesn't actually say to me, you must do it. But actually, if you go back to his slide, he is telling us to do it. And I agree with him. I think that we should identify the patients who do not benefit enough from our therapies and create cohorts out of them and perform research and check out how we can do better. And of course, the machine learning and to identify high risk, that's already going on, but I think that we're still not using it as good as we could. And then, of course, the adherence of patients in general and also in FH, that's a big topic. If we can patients make better adhere to the therapies, we probably will have better results as well. It's a difficult topic. The next session was about Lp(a), and Sam showed us and told us a lot about how this very difficult lipoprotein looks like and what it's doing in our arteries. And he also showed that it's really an important risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And actually, this slide is very impressive because these are not untreated patients. These are treated patients on statins, on even PCSK9 inhibitors. And still, if you have a high level of Lp(a), actually Lp(a) determines the outcome of these patients in these treated patients. And I think that's impressive. So Lp(a) indeed is a very, very important target to reduce the residual risk. And this is a very impressive study by Sam with Pilar Carson. And he showed in this study in New England that in the best dose, he was able to reduce Lp(a) by 80%. And that's impressive. And right now, with the same drug, phase 3 studies are going on, and I'm looking very, very much forward to see the results. And I think that this might be a real chance to reduce the residual risk in our treated patients. Then we went on to a genomics genetics session, and Amit showed, and this is a very smart way of interpreting the data. Here he shows that the polygenic score can be used to identify patients in whom you should actually test Lp(a). That's a very, very smart way of using these scores in the clinic. I love that idea. And he also showed that familial hypercholesterolemia, if you carry a mutation, although you can match patients who have the same LDL cholesterol level. But if you carry a mutation, your risk is much higher. It's 17 compared to 5, the hazard ratio. So that's a huge difference. And then he continued and he showed that there is a large contribution of the polygenic score, polygenic risk score. And that's something what we also found in our FH patients. Although Amit studied it in 6 million SNPs, we only did it in 50,000. But that's a kind of the same pattern. And this means, this holds great promise. We can predict whether or not you will be at very, very high risk when you have FH, or even when you do not have FH. If your LDL cholesterol is not that high, but your genomic risk is very high for cardiovascular disease, you still can be identified as a high risk. And that will be much more precise. And I hope that in future, we can test this kind of precision medicine. And Amit is doing that already. He is running a genome-first approach for FH. And I think that's very, very promising approach. Probably if you do not use the genome in the full extent, we have a large group of patients which we treat, we give them statins, but probably we underestimate the level of risk that they still have. The residual risk can be very high still. So I love this approach. I think that Amit is moving us towards precision medicine, and I hope he will succeed soon. He also showed that the FH variants still have a high risk through all the strata of LDL cholesterol and family history. And you cannot use these as a predictor for testing for a mutation. You can use them, but they're imprecise. You need to test too many persons to identify these mutations. And I think another point is very important, is that DNA is not destiny. It's not a death sentence. If you have a high polygenic risk background, you can still set it off by a favorable lifestyle, or by decreasing your cholesterol or your blood pressure. So it's not destiny. We can treat a polygenic background or a DNA background that's not favorable. And then Kieran continued in this session, and he showed that the famous CRISPR genome editing, he introduced it and discussed it, and he showed that he was using base editing. That's a variant of this CRISPR method, which he further developed. And then he showed that with this method, with this base editing, and it's really, it's hard to grasp, because you're only changing one base pair in this huge set of chromosomes. There's this huge number of bases. So only one base is changed with this editing. And he changed in the PCSK9 gene in monkeys. And then he showed that PCSK9 dropped almost 90%, and LDL dropped 60%. And of course, it's already incredible that he managed to do these things. This is really very sophisticated, very nice genomics or molecular work. But the idea behind it is that if this can be brought to humans, if this can be brought to FH patients, then in future, you might need only a one-time therapy to obtain lifelong protection. And that would be awesome. That would be really an increase of quality of life for the FH patients. So I will actually, we all should keep on looking at what he's publishing and how he is doing, because this holds a very, very great promise. And session 6 about implementation science, and actually I didn't expect actually my expectations were low. I thought implementation science, it's about applied science, but this was one of the sessions with a whole series of eye-openers for me. And of course, the stakeholder engagement needs to be early, otherwise you cannot implement a new screening method for FH. And you should consider to be inclusive in all projects early in the project. And you should conduct implementation research in variety settings. And with that meant that we are doing implementation studies in the university medical centers. But actually, there are probably other places where implementation is much more needed. And we should actually implement in all lines of healthcare. And I was actually, at the moment, I was busy with writing an application, and it was about implementation research. And I immediately changed my application based on her lecture. And then Leni showed us the impact FH study setup. And here you see that implementation research is not an easy thing. This is a very complex trial. This is a very complex project with an endlessly queuing of all kinds of small projects. And then Brian showed us that well, we're running with innovations, we are running into problems. It's often, it's not the invented here, which stops innovations to expand elsewhere. And during his talk, he had a couple of things that need extra attention, and patient advocacy groups are important. Well, actually, that's a plus for FH, because we have an unparalleled strong advocacy group with the foundation. We should stay focused on impact, whatever question we get about our innovations. And I think that's something I probably in the past didn't do so well. So that's what he teach me during this session. And another idea I like very much is that implementation science should be embedded in research programs, and you should actually develop a learning healthcare system. You have your innovation, you implement it, and then actually you still test this ongoing, changing the innovation. Your new innovation comes in. It should be a bit more organic structure instead of all these separate projects queuing up, of which some are successful and some are not. And probably we're not learning enough from our failures if we keep them all separated. Then here my old mentor, John Kesselijn, and he started off talking about 3 concept changes in the prevention of cardiovascular disease. And you all know that John started off working a lot with FH. And he always said, as long as I know him, we should start early. Actually, not in adulthood, but earlier. We need to, somewhere at some age, we need to start with treating children. He also said we should use combination therapy. And we are now moving from using target levels to elimination of the risk factor, the LDL and the Lp(a). And he showed these good results of the clear studies with bempedoic acid. And that's interesting alternative for, especially for people who do not tolerate statins. And probably it will not be enough for FH patients, but for a large group of patients with high risk of cardiovascular disease, this might be a good alternative. In FH, I expect that it will be part of a kind of combination therapy. And he also showed evanacumumab in homozygous FH, the study of Frederick Rahl, showing that LDL was changed by 50%, and that's really incredible. That's actually, that's really something to be very happy about. In homozygous FH, and actually these patients in this study were mostly severe homozygous FH, and they all showed a really big reduction of LDL. So this means that homozygous FH is becoming a better treatable disease due to this new drug. And then the Orion 11 study targeting PCSK9 also showing an impressive reduction of LDL. John said that finally we achieved to treat FH, homozygous FH patients. The heterozygous FH patients, actually we have so many options to treat them now. All of them should be, or virtually all of them should be on their target goals. And then of course there are these medications that can be used as alternatives in heterozygous FH and patients with high cardiovascular disease risk. And in the long term, the other very promising options, the Lp(a) treatment, the genome editing, if they come along, that will change our therapeutic horizon tremendously. And then I didn't talk about the intermezzo of session 5, and I want really to end with this, because this was if I look at it, I'm getting emotional again. This lecture really made me very emotional. And we saw Kate as a young mom struggling, fighting for her children. They all have FH, and her husband. And she was confronted with so much delays and wrong diagnosis, etc., etc. But in the end, I'm happy that they're doing well. I love that update. She also had a talk at the previous summit. So the update was very welcome, hearing that they're doing well. And better treatments, new treatments are so close by. I hope that that will help this lovely family to increase the quality of their lives. So if I need to recap the Global Summit, I could have used one slide. It was awesome research. It were awesome presenters. And there's awesome hope for a better quality of life for all FH patients. And of course, I want to warn you, there's no doubt and no discussion possible with all FH patients must be vaccinated. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you enjoyed this year's summit as much as I did. Now I would like to give the word back to Katherine Wilemon, and she actually doesn't need any further introduction to you.
Thank you, Eric. Wow, that was really a terrific tour of the last 8 sessions of the 2020 FH Global Summit. I know that we're halfway through 2021, but it's been a weird year all the way around. And so we, as Eric, so adeptly shared, really felt like there was so much to cover that we needed 8 sessions this year. For those of you who are new, we have been holding the summit for about a decade now. And the goal of this meeting is really to break down silos and to learn from each other. We are always inviting speakers from a variety of fields, and we are always including various stakeholders who wouldn't as often find themselves in the same room, even if the room is a Zoom room now, to be able to be exposed to the same information and traditionally to be able to have conversations back and forth. But this year we couldn't come together in person because of the global pandemic. But it's been amazing, if we think about it, to watch the science and the business of medicine kick into high gear in the face of this global pandemic. And I'm very hopeful that by next spring, we will be able to be together again. It's also been sobering to be reminded of how vulnerable humans are. Our means of survival depend on our collaborative use of knowledge. We don't have big teeth, exceptional speed, or special tricks like flight or camouflage. Our biggest advantage in terms of adaptation is really to work together and to figure out how the natural world works and to come up with solutions. So, but we see with the coronavirus that knowledge and even novel medications are not enough, just as we see with FH. We really are witnessing how important it is that information is communicated in a way that recipients can really receive it, and that they have the opportunity to build trust with the experts who are giving them that information and to voice their concerns. How accurately and effectively information gets communicated is key. And I think we all need to think about how much of medicine and success in medicine actually takes place outside of the clinic, and how important people are as part of the care team. So I miss seeing all of you. I see that we have the picture back up on the screen now from one of our summits. I think this is the one in Miami. It really, we can't wait to be together again with you in person, but we thank you for joining us, nevertheless, by Zoom. And I also want to thank all of our stellar speakers, just incredible. Our steering committee, Dr. Josh Knowles and Dr. Dan Rader, who have been our co-chairs and also play a key role in the work of the FH Foundation, as well as my co-host, Dr. Mary McGowan, who is our Chief Medical Officer and is just doing an amazing job adding to the work that the FH Foundation can do. I also want to thank our sponsors, because their support is absolutely key. I have my notes up here. Sorry, guys. And all of you for participating. I want to thank the FH Foundation team, which is small but truly amazing. And I want to especially recognize Amanda Sheldon, our VP of Communications, for her many critical roles in putting together the FH Global Summit again this year. We're grateful to all of you for stepping up to find the solutions to the problems that face people living with inherited risk of cardiovascular disease and with heart disease. And if we go to the next slide, I think, Eric, there actually is data about how important it is for individuals living with heart disease and also who have familial hypercholesterolemia to be sure and get vaccinated. For those of you who are physicians, I know you're keeping abreast of this, the fact that We see that being infected by the coronavirus does make it more likely that you will have a cardiovascular event. And we see that those who have heart disease are even at greater risk, about threefold the risk of the general population. And those who are diagnosed with FH and also have heart disease are at higher risk still. But it's really interesting to note that individuals who are identified by the FIND-FH algorithm, meaning when our artificial intelligence model runs on the FH Foundation's very large national healthcare encounter database of about 300 million Americans, we flag certain individuals who don't have a diagnosis code for FH, but look as if they probably have FH. And those individuals are at the very highest risk of having a cardiovascular event if they contract COVID. And we have hypothesized that in fact may be because they do have some level of atherosclerosis, but they're being inadequately treated. And I think this is just really a compelling example of why it is so critically important that we find people who are at risk and we do everything in our power to reduce that risk, because many times, this is just one example, they're going to be at an intersection in their lives where being at risk of heart disease or having established heart disease makes them more vulnerable to other things. So if you're an individual with FH listening, I hope that you will, if you haven't already yet, go and get vaccinated. This table is going to appear in a publication. It's been accepted and it should be out in the next couple of weeks. So if we go to the next slide, this is a favorite quote that I know I shared with you guys for those of you who were there in Miami. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I really think that's true. We just heard Eric's great summary of all the progress that's been made, the novel breakthrough therapies, understanding of the role that genetics plays in heart disease. You just saw a table created by cutting edge analytical techniques that allow us to look at enormous amounts of data and organize it and make sense of it and gain insights from it. We're all sitting here together, although we're not, in a virtual reality. The future is absolutely here, but it is not evenly distributed. And unfortunately, the FH population, although we have been key in some of the scientific discoveries that have pushed our understanding of LDL as a causative factor in atherosclerosis, have been, as a population, the FH population, really great lab rats, I like to call us, for the scientists to understand lipid metabolism, the role of LDL, as I said, in atherosclerosis, and some of the novel therapies that have come out in the last decade. But as a population, the FH population has been left behind. And what we also see is that there are disparities, and those disparities and those structural biases and barriers to women getting care, to people of different ethnicities getting care, it gets pulled forward with us, because the most likely scenario is that what we have today we'll have more of in the future. And I would submit that we don't just want more of what we have. We actually want better. And when people talk about FH as a prototype for precision medicine, I think that hinges on a paradigm shift that has not really yet occurred. Let's go to the next slide. And I'll tell you what that paradigm shift is in just a minute. But let's look at some of both the progress that we've made, because when I started this work 10 years ago, it was estimated that 1% of individuals with FH had been diagnosed. So we are making progress. This is, again, from the 2 data sources that the FH Foundation has put together. Screening, 20% of 9 to 11-year-olds have had their cholesterol screened, even though those are the guidelines set forth by the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Now, it's interesting because if you talk to pediatric cardiologists, they're surprised by that number. They think that's pretty good compared to their own experience in practice. But when we think about the fact that there's a call again and again to identify individuals before sickness takes hold, then we're actually doing a pretty lousy job. And the study that came out in I think it was in 2020, the Dutch study, looking at how children of individuals with FH fared if they were put on statins early in life, and showing that they could have decades more life than their parents had without an event, really underlines how critical this is if we really are going to be a prototype for precision medicine. Diagnosis, again, progress, great progress within the United States. We've gone from 1% to 20%. And this comes again from the FH Foundation's National Healthcare Encounter database. And how are we doing in terms of management? Well, this data comes from the Cascade FH registry, where we are following about 6,000 patients longitudinally who have been diagnosed with familial hypercholesterolemia. And I want to do a shout out to all of our PIs, our sites who are centers of excellence around the United States, who make it possible for us to have this collaboration and see this data as a whole, rather than having it siloed within each institution. And to thank those individuals who raised their hand and said, yes, I'll participate in research. I think this will help the greater good and perhaps even my own family and children. And what we see is about 20% of individuals who have FH and heart disease reach the recommended level of 70 or below for their LDL cholesterol. But we know we have so many more therapies, and we actually think that maybe those guidelines could be updated. Let's go to the next slide. This is again from the registry. Individuals with FH who reached treatment goals, they were on multiple therapies. And this is really important because what I understand about how lipid lowering therapy usually progresses is it's pretty conservative. People are, if they are diagnosed with FH, put on a high dose statin, hopefully maybe ezetimibe is added, and then maybe as time progresses, they're put on another one of these novel therapies, a PCSK9 inhibitor or Nexletol or Nexlizet. But this really reflects a lack of urgency, perhaps, to get the LDL down to target and then to make changes and back off of therapy if needed. I mean, I think it reflects a certain inertia that we all have to work towards fixing. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to bring this up again because I do think if we're not careful, the future will look very much like it does today. And the barriers to care and the gaps in management will persist for certain groups. We see that women are not as aggressively treated. And we know that heart disease is the #1 killer of women. We see that our human biases play a role, and that people who are Black or brown are not being treated as aggressively. And there could be a variety of reasons for this, but we need to intentionally commit to tackling it. So let's go to the next slide. So these are advocates for awareness. We recently held our first virtual advocates for awareness training, and we had 30 individuals who raised their hand, joined us on a Zoom call with others. And one of the things we'd asked them to prepare for in committing to be part of this program was about a 3-minute overview of how they came to be diagnosed with FH. It was amazing how succinct and well prepared they were. And each story was different. But I can tell you that of the 30 people who spoke about how they became diagnosed with FH, to a person, every single one of them had had to lose multiple family members, a parent when they were young, a child that they had never imagined that could happen. For a parent to lose a child is a horrible thing, a sibling, or they had been hospitalized and had an intervention. So what we at the FH Foundation hear from our patient community, what we see in the data, is that for the vast majority of individuals with familial hypercholesterolemia, they are not being diagnosed until after they are sick. And therefore, we cannot stand proudly as a prototype for precision medicine if we don't commit to prevention. And it shouldn't have to be this way, because we really have all the tools. I mean, it's just stunning the number of therapies that we have and the ability now to cheaply sequence people's, relatively inexpensively sequence people's genome. But there are concerns that patients have that perhaps they won't be able to get life insurance. There's resistance by physicians to really, really lean in and lower people's LDL cholesterol until they have heart disease. There are barriers to having those therapies paid for. Let's go to the next slide. So what I would ask of all of you until we meet again is that we really focus on how we can solve for early identification, how we can creatively assure, because medicine is a business, that prevention gets paid for and that patients feel empowered with a sense of self-efficacy and protected, that they can learn about the fact that they are born at high risk for the #1 cause of death and illness in the entire world. Perhaps COVID has outstripped it momentarily and sadly, but historically that is the case. And I think that when we come together again and in our own work as we go off, this is what we need to focus on, because we have the therapies and we have the knowledge. So, and I really think in the end, the field of medicine and the science behind it is ultimately about the human desire to win the chance for another day or another decade free of suffering. And we can do that if we work together to commit to prevention. So I want to thank you all again for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Dan Rader, who is going to tell you where we can go next.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And thank you very much, Eric, for your awesome review of this year's summit. And thanks to all of you for joining us today and for your active participation in this virtual summit series. I think we can all agree that despite, and in some cases because of, the virtual nature of this summit, it has been a major success. We're really interested in your feedback. We hope that in the closing breakout sessions to follow today, that you'll let us know what you liked, what you didn't, and how we should be thinking about future summits. We do want to let you know that we're planning next year's FH Global Summit. We're still working out the details, but we can announce that we plan to have 3 virtual summit events in the fall of 2021. And then, as Catherine mentioned, in the spring of 2022, we hope to have an in-person summit event. Please stay tuned for additional details. So now we'd like to invite all of you to join us for a virtual closing reception. The FH Global Summit would not be the same without the opportunity to connect with all of those in the community who are advancing identification and care for individuals with cardiovascular disease, familial hypercholesterolemia, and high lipoprotein (a). So we decided to end this year's summit series with a closing reception split into several breakout groups to promote interpersonal interaction. We hope you will join, even if briefly, to interact with colleagues and let us know your thoughts about this year's summit. We have placed the link into the chat to direct you to log off the webinar and join a Zoom breakout meeting so we can see each other on video. Should you get disconnected, the link is also available on our website under the summit menu and at the bottom of your confirmation email for today's session. Once again, thanks for your participation and for the support of the FH Foundation. And my daughter Jessie chimes in. We look forward to seeing you in the reception and in September. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the breakout reception. Bye.